with the hybrid people, so take your seats and I just have to get going. Good morning and welcome to the first day of AusCert 2021, our 20th year at the conference. As we are a virtual event, or virtual hybrid event this year, everything's going to be streamed live, and the way the streaming platform works is it's a very hard start and stop deadline. So bang on the start time and right on the stop time, we literally have to stop. So one of the key things we need to do, both to make sure it's fair for both people in person and remote, do use the conference app to actually submit your questions, and that way at the end of the session, if there's time for questions, the presenter can actually answer those questions then, but can also answer those questions at a later time. Okay, for our first session here in the Southport room, we've got Dushyant Sattiraju, who's the CyberSecOps Lead for Deakin University, SecOps Manager for Deakin University, going to be telling us how to actually do SOAR in as lightweight a manner as possible, but to make it effective. Please welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for the nice introduction. So I'll be talking today a bit about our experience, our journey, about how we've managed to get around to implementing our security operations center or security strategy at Deakin. So my name is Dushyant. I work for Deakin University. Have been there for quite some time now, and our security journey has been fairly recent. So we've gone through a 4-year journey of security maturity recently, and I'm going to talk a bit about that. So before we start, just to give everyone a bit of an overview on who we are. We are a university based in Victoria, regional, and in Melbourne. So we have about 65,000 students, about 19,000 staff, both sessional and continuing. And we're spread across 4 campuses in Victoria. We have about 15,000 managed workstations and about 30,000 servers across 2 data centers in Victoria. So we are a fairly on-prem organization. And in IT, about 250 staff and 10 staff in security and 4 in security operations. So, and this, our scope is managing security for all of the university. That includes everything from critical infrastructure within the university through to managing security for researchers in the organization. So there's a broad diversity within the industry, and that's where this actually becomes more and more challenging and interesting at the same time. So a bit about our journey in the university. So we've started a security maturity uplift program about 4 years ago called Deakinshield, which is where we've started from the scratch, implemented a few technical controls. So that was the exercise that we've embarked to prepare for setting up a security operations center. And then this is by no means a phased approach. We're still doing a lot of preparation work to try and get some of the use cases and controls in place. But essentially, we've picked a few low-hanging fruit, started putting in some technical controls in place. And we've tuned them, implemented secure configuration to ensure that there's preventive controls in place to prevent from cyber attacks. And we've then started doing some log collection and analysis, and then starting to respond. So a very straightforward approach there. And while we were doing that, we were identifying rooms for improvement and automate the analysis and response where possible. So today I'm going to go through a few use cases where we've actually done some automation, something simple, something that we've done with the tools that we've already had license for, or open source tools that we've leveraged. So a very lean approach there. Just talking a bit quickly about preparation. So we've basically put in controls in different parts of the network and the organization. So perimeter controls, so border firewalls, F5 load balancers that also work as web application firewalls. We've put some controls for people. So we've done awareness and training programs that we've set up for staff and students. We've also set up things like multi-factor authentication, which We've rolled out to all staff and almost about, we're currently rolling it out to students. We've almost 50% there, and hopefully by the end of the month, we would finish our rollout for all students as well. And we have, endpoint protection, protection in the network layer. So we've done some work there, implementing technical tools like Stealth Watch, which gives you a good overview on netflow traffic. And we've also had put in some controls for securing information as such, which I'll walk through in a bit. So once some of those technology tools were put in place, we've looked at what are the quick wins that we can actually get from those controls. So as you can see, we've started putting together some basic security controls for DNS. So the first product or tool set that we started working with was Cisco Umbrella for DNS protection. And we just did the bare minimum. We said we will start with blocking malicious sites and blocking adult content as a starting point. And like universities, if you've any experience working for or with your university, you would know there is no one rule that fits all. So at every stage, we had to actually identify how we would manage exemptions for some of those rule sets. So once we've done some DNS protection and content filtering based on DNS, we started with implementation of email security. So we've basically started blocking known bad spam that we've and we started dropping malicious emails as we see fit. And then we've implemented endpoint protection and application whitelisting on endpoint and locking down admin rights where possible. So I think that was a really good win. So this is it's a good starting place if you've not done a lot of security in the organization. This is a really good place to start. And then we started collecting logs. So we started logging information coming out of some of these tool sets into our logging platforms. And we tried to set up a few playbooks. So we tried to understand from a business point of view, what are the things that we need, that we're most concerned about. So identify use cases and prioritize the ones that we need to start working with. And we started writing a custom place to mitigate that. So this was when, before we actually had multi-factor authentication rolled out to our students, where we had a play that basically looks at authentication logs on our single sign-on platform and shows you, it's an impossible travel use case. So looks at login sessions and the time or distance that it takes to go from one point to another. And we've been using this as a means to identify any account compromises, and we started that as a starting point. So some of these use cases, instead of actually putting in energy on automating response to this use case, we spend that energy in trying to fix the problem by introducing multi-factor authentication. So half the time, some of the plays that you see, there are probably better and more efficient ways of actually addressing the problem. So it doesn't always have to be, how can we get this to the analyst this alert to the analyst as quickly as possible, and what buttons do they click to make this an actionable response. So that's a very different way of looking at security automation. So that's why we started looking at how can we make this more efficient for the business overall. And then we've implemented a tool that does some machine learning. So what we struggled with was prioritizing these alerts. So for instance, if we actually had a user who's reached out, who's visited a malicious website, identifying what that malicious website was and what that user, was that a legitimate DNS request to that website, is actually a challenging thing to do, because we also have cybersecurity researchers on the same network as we have financial staff. So if there's a staff member in accounts payable visiting an infected site, a known bad site, as to someone in the School of IT doing research on cybersecurity, you'd want to prioritize those alerts differently. So that's where we brought a machine learning tool in place, which gave us that context. So which gave a risk score for these alerts based on the peer groups. So is this normal behavior for that particular user? Is it normal behavior for the users around them in the peer group? Which is how we've started to prioritize these alerts. So I have two examples here. The first one is a non-executive user logging into an executive machine. So like we were really trying to target and identify if there were any malicious login into workstations that owned by executives. In this use case, it was a support staff member logging in and trying to help an executive, but it's still a good alert to actually get some visibility on. And the second one is one of those impossible travel use cases where we've had a student who's basically a staff member, sorry, in this case, who's actually logged in from a new country that they've never logged in from before. And we've also seen that there was there were emails sent to disposable email addresses, so suspected data breach, but when we actually created the user, they were just doing something dodgy with setting up some subscription services using a VPN that they couldn't access from Australia. So it's interesting to see. It's not a breach, but this sort of data is really interesting to look at. And once we started doing a lot of this analysis, we struggled to figure out how we actually respond to these events. One of the biggest issue we've had where we thought we need to improve quickly was actually doing the response part. So if we actually had to block an IP address, for instance, on the border firewall, we had to log a service ticket for the networking team to do this for us, because we didn't have access to every appliance in the infrastructure. This was getting more and more challenging for us. We wanted a more efficient way of doing this. And that's when we started looking at use cases where we can actually improve. So I'll talk through 3 different use cases that we've looked at where we've actually done some automation to make it more efficient for us. One of our biggest pain point, and I think most of you guys would also agree with me, is phishing emails. Getting people to identify spear phishing emails, getting your staff or your users to actually report it to you, and responding to those alerts. So this was one of our biggest pain point. And the way we actually did this was we implemented an add-on on Outlook that allowed people to easily report an email. When we first started doing campaigns for staff to report emails, they would just forward it to us, which didn't make a lot of sense from a security analyst point of view, because you don't have the right headers to do any analysis. So we started then getting everyone to use this phish alert button, which would just forward the email as an attachment to us and would give them a quick prompt that the forward was successful and deletes the email from their inbox. So it was a very easy way for staff to be able to report emails to us. And then we used to like literally manually go through every single email that got forwarded to a shared mailbox and do analysis. And it was getting noisy by the day. So if there was a phishing campaign that went to 3,000 staff in the organization and 500 of them reported, that's 500 emails to go through. So this was very draining for us in terms of resourcing. We were spending a lot of time on this, and we wanted to find a more efficient way of doing this. That's where we did our first automation use case. So what we've basically done was we implemented a tool called PhishER, which is a know-before tool set. And that would basically receive this phishing email, and it will group you can actually group phishing emails together based on subject, based on sender. So you can actually respond to them in a group, which is great. And you can actually look at this. It extracts domains and URLs for you, as you can see as you can see on the top. And it also pulls out the attachments, which we send to then a sandbox environment to deploy safely and interact with. So this was a really good way for us to actually identify phishing emails. And then we started prioritizing based on how many people have actually received those emails. And we were able to get to a point where our response time went from 3 to 4 business days to respond to a phishing email down to a few hours. And that was a massive win for us. And then we started getting to a point where we were like, not everyone who receives a phishing email reports it. In my organization, fortunately, majority of them do. But then we started identifying that there are a lot of people who actually don't. So how do we deal with that? And then we've implemented a new add-on to this tool that basically, so as you can see here, if that's clear at all, you can actually see that we can run a query against O365, and we can actually see how many users have actually seen this email before. So this is the view that we get. So in this section, you can actually see how many people have actually read the email, where the email is currently sitting in the 365 instance. So have they deleted it? Is it in the junk email folder, or have they archived it? So you can actually see that quickly. And you can also respond, so you can proactively go and delete the email from everyone's inbox from here. So which is really good. We've done this for a few phishing campaigns where we thought the risk is too broad because people are working from home. They're not necessarily going through the corporate network. They don't have the same level of protection because some of them are actually using BYO devices. So we need to act quickly. So this is where we were able to do this at the click of a button. And that's how we actually got value in automating our first use case for phishing emails. What we then started seeing, you did see that there's actually a pattern here. Like we identify a pain point, we try and address that pain point, and then we try and improve that over time. So it's not a set and forget like we've heard in today's keynote. SOAR or any automation is not a set and forget thing. You have to constantly keep improving this, and you constantly have to try and make this more efficient to your security analysts. Then what we started doing is we started looking at emails that are actually being sent by different parts of the organization that don't really look legit. So we've recently had a marketing campaign that went out, a survey link that went out to a bunch of staff members to click on a SurveyMonkey link, and most of them ended up reporting it to us. So we were like, we need to condone the bad practice, but we also need to figure out a way to automate. So the automation that we've done, where we don't actually have a security analyst manually looking at emails, was automate known false positives. So we knew that ServiceNow emails, a couple of months ago, we had ServiceNow emails going through from a ServiceNow domain and doesn't come from a Deakin domain, and a lot of people were reporting them if they've never seen them before. So we created Yara rules to try and address that. So we created Yara rules to respond to known good emails, so to identify those false positives and respond to the users. So that's the first use case that I wanted to talk about. The second one I wanted to talk through is automation for reducing risk of data breach. So one of the biggest risks that we've identified lately is people oversharing files without accidentally, so without actually having the knowledge of what those file share permissions mean. We're seeing this more and more in the 365 platform, where users are generating public links to files in their personal OneDrive folder and sharing that with other staff members because they think that's the easiest way. Interesting enough, we recently had a breach where someone has put in a sensitive file in a meeting invite, and their calendar was accessible to other staff members in their organization, and that link was a public link to a OneDrive folder in their file share. So this was an outstanding risk that we needed to address. And the way we went to do addressing this risk was we basically leveraged two tools that we had already been licensed for with the Microsoft Suite. One was the Microsoft Cloud App Security Portal, which was something that we were already licensed for. And the other, which we used for automation, was the Microsoft Power Automate platform. I had to really think of the name because they keep changing the name on me all the time. So what you see here are basically alerts that are generated by policies that we've set up in the Cloud App Security Portal. So Cloud App Security has actually been really good for us because it gave us visibility to SaaS solutions and cloud solutions that we had no visibility for. We couldn't get logs for what was happening within tools like Workday, 365, but we were able to do that here. So as you can see, there's an alert that gets generated every time a file is shared with the entire organization or has a public link. And what we do then is we actually pass that alert through Microsoft Power Automate. So we basically extract key information from these alerts and forward that alert back to the user in an email, asking them to confirm if this was actually done intentionally or was done accidentally. So this was really good to promote awareness about file sharing. So what we realized with awareness was if you're trying to give people examples that they can relate to or that is really close to what they're doing, it's much better received than just broadcasting information about security. And this is the actual end user's view. So they'd basically get an email that's requesting for input, and it has three different options at the bottom. So it has some information there about how to share information. So we call that campaign Sharing with Care. And we basically had three different action items for the end user. So do you want to keep sharing this file? Do you want to remove file sharing permissions? So you might look at the file path and the file name and realize, oh my God, this shouldn't actually be public. And then you can remove the users. Or you can just choose to remove any external sharing permissions. So you might think, I actually don't want anyone outside the organization to view this, but I don't really care if it is internal only. So these are the sorts of things that we had to do because we can't have a policy that applies for everyone. We can't say, no, users can't share files externally because we're a university at the end of the day. So we have to deal with the limitation of what the organization offers. So this has been a very powerful automation tool for us. And again, this kind of gives I hope this gives people perspective that automation doesn't necessarily have to be an alert that goes to your SOC analyst to be able to respond. This alert, our SOC analysts don't even see them. So it goes straight to the end user. And if they don't respond to it within a certain time frame, we remove permissions on the file anyway. So this has been really good for us because the other challenge being in security that we've had is we've educated our users not to click on dodgy links, not to talk to people who they don't trust and not respond to cold calls. And when we are trying to get in touch with staff members, asking them to either reset the password or do things, they don't trust us anymore. Which is a really good problem to have because you don't want them to just randomly respond to anyone who calls them out of the blue. So the last use case I want to talk about is bringing all of this together. Like the important thing is that we, like I said in one of my previous slides, that we are struggling to actually respond because we actually don't have access to some of these tool sets. So we want to be able to respond more efficiently. And to be able to do that, you need to be able to bring all the data together in a tool where your staff can access and analyze information and be able to respond from the tool itself. So one of the big shifts that we're doing is to actually centralize all the indicators that we have within the organization. So when something gets blocked somewhere, everyone knows where it was blocked and why it was blocked. because we've had instances where we block a malicious IP address, that an Amazon IP address or something that belongs to a shared service, and then it 2 days later it breaks something else. So we need to understand if something is blocked, why it's blocked, and be able to give users that feedback. So to be able to do that, we've set up our MISP instance to have all the indicators that we are concerned about listed in there. And then we have integrated that with an open source project called the Hive. And we basically, if anyone has attended yesterday's tutorial on Hive, you see that it's a good value tool. It's open source, which is great, and you're able to pull in all the information, all the alerts to one central place where you can actually respond. Because your traditional ticketing services don't really cater for security use cases, so they don't have like a triage mechanism. We use ServiceNow; it doesn't really have a triage mechanism to filter through alerts. Every alert is a case. So over here, at least you can actually pick which alerts that you actually want to add to a case, and you can group alerts together. In the example here, I have a use case where we have a Splunk search that goes through and looks at newly created domains with combinations of the words Deakin in it to identify phishing campaigns and phishing URLs. For those who actually don't report them to us. And this basically does a Splunk search. I wish it was a bit clearer, but this basically does a Splunk search and extracts that information through here, and it identified 2 domains. And you can see that one domain is actually a legit domain that was set up by a university student club. And the other domain is a malicious domain that was set up to send, it hasn't fortunately been used so far, but we blocked it in our organization. And you can see we're able to enrich this data by pulling in information from Talos and our umbrella instance to see if this is already blocked. Because more often than not, you'd see a phishing campaign and you look at the domain and you think, oh, this domain, we need to block this. But your security provider probably would have already blocked it. So this is a good way of actually looking at which ones are already blocked. So over here, you can actually see that this was already part of our blacklist and it was already blocked. So we don't actually need to take an action. But if we needed to, so there's a responder that we've actually set up where you can click here and blacklist that domain with an umbrella, and then you actually have a reference point to why the domain was blacklisted and who's actually done it. So there's a case attributing to it. So our next steps are to actually expose some of this data to areas like our service support team, where if someone calls in saying they can't access a certain resource, the service team is able to query this data and able to say that this was blocked for this reason. So it's always good to be able to give people feedback on why something is blocked. And the next is to actually expand this to appliances that we don't have responders for already. So we're hoping to get to a point where we have a central repository to have all these indicators rather than blocking different things in different appliances and never going back and revisiting them. So that's pretty much it, the end of my presentation. I just have a few minutes for everyone for questions. So if you have any questions, if there are any questions that come through, I'm happy to answer. Do you have any questions?
First of all, I'd like everyone to thank Dushyant for informative and interesting talk on what they're doing at Deakin University. So far, we haven't actually had any questions come through the app, but if anybody does have any questions, either call out and I'll repeat them or put them into the app. Personally, I'm interested in how you're looking at extending what you've already done, integrating with other intelligence that's out there, things with say maybe your ServiceNow validation. Potentially, you've already looked at the way ServiceNow was actually now coming from a Deakin University address rather than a ServiceNow address.
Yeah.
But things like automated analysis of DMARC authentication results, against pre-approved or known valid private keys and signers within that infrastructure, and how and whether or not you're looking at maybe doing that as part of your automated authentication validation of some of these reports, or when you're looking at some of the other emails that might be coming into your system.
Yeah, so I think I'm sure I'm not going to make a lot of friends by saying this out loud, but we don't really trust email that much. So I feel like organizations or users put in so much trust in email that they're like, oh, DMARC is going to be a silver bullet. But we've actually found out that there are organizations. So we've had an organization a couple of months ago that has all the right security implementations for their MX address, but they have staff whose accounts were compromised and were sending phishing emails. So how do you stop that? So I think putting trust into the actual workflow itself is hard. So what we're trying to do within my organization, at least, is to try and shift the approach and to basically say, from Deakin University, just like banks do, from Deakin University, you're not going to get an email to change your payroll information. So you're not going to get an email to action a certain thing or share your credit card information. So that's the sort of education that we actually want to give to our end users, rather than saying, oh, this is how you actually trust an email, or this is how you don't trust an email. That would be my approach, and I'm sure other people will have different views.
So what are the challenges that you experience when it comes to prioritizing which use cases to perform first or to automate first?
That's a really good question. I think the way we've actually done that, we've looked at a few different things. So we have a very mature, we call it a GRC function, but we have a very mature way of identifying risks and registering risks in a centralized risk register. So which does get prioritized from a business perspective on what needs to be addressed. So we are using those risks. So the oversharing permission is a good example where that was actually identified as a business risk. And it was a medium to high business risk that we were wanting to address. And that's how we prioritize that automation there.
We've got a few people interested in why aren't you using Splunk to bring it all together?
Cost. I think we're trying to keep it as lean as possible. We know that the tool sets that we're using we will have instances where we will hit a brick wall, and we would want to mature enough. But this is a starting point for us. We want to start somewhere. We want to be able to show value in automation and orchestration, and that hopefully will give us what we need to get Splunk or whatever tool on board.
Okay, so somebody else is asking, what was the platform you used to search and delete emails from Office 365?
We use a product from KnowBe4 called Phishing. It's been really good for us because the one good thing that it actually does really well is if you run phishing campaigns through the same portal, it does not send those phishing campaign emails to your analyst to review. The user gets a pop-up saying, thanks for reporting the phishing email, and the email gets deleted. That's it. So it's a good end-to-end solution.
Okay, just going through some of these other questions here. Somebody's asking, how do you enrich your data and IOCs to keep automation from blocking legitimate domains?
It is a challenge. I know it's not an easy answer. It is a challenge. We've just made sure that our analysts are trained enough to be able to identify which ones are legit domains and which ones aren't. We have been looking recently on some of the whitelists that are available on MISP that we can use to identify those Microsoft IPs and stuff, but they're not really up to date. So we're trying the best we can, I guess.
So with your unrealistic travel validation and usage of those login statistics, are you both alerting the SOC and the end user that they're having unrealistic travel?
Yeah, at this stage, we basically decided that we will work through our MFA rollout and revisit the issues. So in the past, we've had a lot of account compromises in the staff and student remit when we didn't have multi-factor auth. And I feel like that's a better way of solving the problem rather than alerting users.